So, Cole, are we thinking we're ready to get started?
I think so, yes.
Okay, so welcome everybody to our afternoon panel discussion. My name is Martha Karcher. I'm one of the co-chairs of Our Revolution Massachusetts and a member of the Mass Peace Action Organizing Coalition. In this second half of the conference, our panel will address organizing for political power in communities often overlooked by progressive groups and the Democratic and Republican parties. Neighborhoods where Black, Indigenous, people of color, and the poor have reason to doubt that elected officials will ever deliver for them. In these urban and rural communities, working families experience economic insecurity and struggle with family instability, drugs, and depression. They have little hope that Democratic Party elites, or for that matter, progressive elites, understand their needs, much less be willing to go to bat for them. One could easily argue that the poor, whether rural or urban, white or non-white, experience the domestic effects of our country's focus on militarism in the most acute of ways, as budgets for education, childcare, public transportation, healthcare, and environmental cleanups are cut and excess military equipment is gifted to police departments. Mirroring the military itself, our society focuses on hierarchy and punishment rather than inclusion and democratic problem solving. I am so excited to hear from our distinguished panelists who will speak to us about their efforts to organize and empower communities who have little to no representation in our elected bodies. I am eager to hear about their struggles and also their victories. However, before I get started, I will quickly review the schedule. This panel begins at 2 and continues till 3. After that, we will return at 4:20. I will review this again at the end of this panel. And then during and after the panel, as you have questions, please put them in the chat. Russell Friedman will be our question monitor, and I will turn to him to ask the questions, indicating for whom the question is intended if that is specified. And now our introductions. I'm going to begin introducing Jean-Luc Pierite. I will introduce the 2 other panelists after Jean-Luc has spoken. He is president of the board of the North American Indian Center of Boston and represents them in our Mass Peace Action Organizing Coalition. A member of the Tunica-Biloxi tribe of Louisiana and originally from New Orleans, he resides in Jamaica Plain. I should also add that Jean-Luc is brilliant. He is the International Procurement and Logistics Manager for the FAB Foundation, formed in 2009 to facilitate and support the growth of the International Fab Lab network, as well as the development of regional capacity building organizations. He has degrees in video game design, communications, and Japanese, and we're very lucky that he is a member of our progressive coalition and that he is here today to speak on our panel. Jean-Luc, are you around? Can you speak?
Yes. Thank you, Martha. That's like really generous introduction. Really happy to be here. I'm going to refer back for those folks that were in the lunch break, had your stream going during the lunch break, or if you were just joining as we were kind of reconvening at 2. Those 2 speeches that ended the lunch break, Leo the Cowboy and then Kirby Waters, the 4th, really critical to speaking to Leonard Peltier. Really thankful that was being played, because I'm going to be revisiting that the push for his clemency. But the title of my talk, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I start my start my timer here. So the title of my talk is Building Political Power with the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. And I kind of wanted to give a little bit more of a global perspective. First, what I usually like to kind of start off with to kind of tease everybody's brains, what we're kind of dealing with in terms of the systems that have been imposed on this land during this whole centuries-long colonial occupation. We have very top-down systems of value. From on the left-hand side, you'll see a medal from the King of Spain, and then a historical blurb, which actually kind of like details this exchange of this medal from the King of Spain to one of my ancestors. So you kind of have value being passed down from heads of state in that way and forming international relationships. I juxtapose that with what we have here in Massachusetts, the example of the wampum belt. Now, this is something that everybody in the community usually comes together. This is what you see on the screen here is Stephen Peters actually holding up a wampum belt that was crafted by many members of the different bands of Wampanoag here within the state. And each member of the community comes together and makes each of these beads and then encodes a story or like a international agreement, a treaty. This is actually a legal document that you're looking at here. And so what I wanted to kind of like emphasize is that this is sort of coming from the grassroots, and it builds upon the themes, if you're familiar with the Red Nation and the Red Deal movement. There are principles that are being upheld here, indigenous principles, that true value, true change comes from the grassroots and should be, and also should be pushed from the left as well. And then really quickly, those same clams, they actually are used in this, what you see on the left-hand side, the shell middens that are along the New England coast that are currently endangered by coastal erosion and rising sea levels. These shell middens actually encapsulate thousands of years of history. And so when I actually talk about this, I talk about this in ways of like, you see these shell middens, and then the same shells are actually being used for wampum belts. Here you have binary logic and encoding of data. Here you have storage of data. This is actually like indigenous technologies and indigenous systems that have predated all of what we're talking about. And so the immensity of that actually kind of speaks to why we should center indigenous peoples, not just Jean-Luc, but all of the tribes, all of the nations that have stewarded this land since time immemorial. And so, as I said, Leonard Peltier, he's the United States longest serving indigenous political prisoner. Back a month ago, there was a walk that was organized by the Grand Council of the American Indian Movement. For 15 weeks, members of AIM walked for at least 20 miles a day until they got to the United States Capitol. And in this quote, Nick Estes from the Lower Brule Sioux tribe is saying that the lawyers who actually put Leonard in jail are marching with us today and demanding that lawmakers and President Biden take action. 47 years has been too long. Now, seven senators most recently have issued a letter urging for clemency for Leonard Peltier. Unfortunately, at the tribal leaders' White House summit, which happened within the past few weeks, Leonard Peltier was a missed opportunity within President Biden's address, and so we see a continuance of this really inhumane prison sentence. Also, we're talking nationally about the effort to protect the Indian Child Welfare Act. Now, Chase Iron Eyes from the Lakota Law Project, Oglala Sioux Tribe, he asserts here that it's no accident that the plaintiffs in the Brackeen versus Holland case, which oral arguments were heard for at the Supreme Court within the past month. It's no accident that those plaintiffs are represented by Gibson and Dunn, lawyers who also represent our adversaries, fossil fuel conglomerates, and energy transfer partners, and Enbridge, responsible for Dakota Access and Line 3 pipelines. For these attorneys, this case isn't so much about Native children, it's about nationally sanctioned genocide of Native people. And so even though we're talking about the health and welfare of Native children, you actually see that intersectionality of fossil fuel interests creeping in. And why would this law firm actually represent the plaintiffs pro bono? And then also at COP27, Big Wind, who was one of the speakers within NAICOB and UAIN's Indigenous Liberation Speaker Series, they're Northern Arapaho, they're Two-Spirit, climate activists, but they actually participated in a protest of the Inflation Reduction Act because there were, I'm going to kind of detail that in the next slide, but they participated in this protest during President Biden's remarks at COP27. He was only there for a few hours, but because Big Wind participated in this banner lifting, which actually read just People versus Fossil Fuels, their credentials for any negotiation rooms were taken away, further silencing any Indigenous activists that were at COP27. And being at COP26, I can tell you that Indigenous peoples were outnumbered by fossil fuel lobbyists 2-1. And so, you know, there's a lot that's here, but basically, you know, this is the message from People versus Fossil Fuels, calling out the poison pill introduced by Senator Manchin, all of the fast tracking that's being done for projects such as the Mountain Valley Pipeline. That's actually within the Inflation Reduction Act. And so even though you know, it's touted as something that is a win, it's also something that is disproportionately paid for by Black and Indigenous peoples. And so that brings us to the conversation within the state and the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. You know, these are 5 common sense bills honoring and establishing a statewide Indigenous Peoples Day, protecting Native American heritage, making sure that all of our human remains and artifacts get out of the archives and return home, banning racist mascots, teaching Native American history, and then providing for the educational outcomes for Native youth. We have filed these bills within the past 2 sessions. Actually, we were able to get the Seal and Motto bill passed, but we're up against a lot of this old boy system that we are all kind of faced with. How do we actually get common sense bills that actually directly impact Indigenous peoples here within the Commonwealth through the state legislature? And not only that, but because these are common sense and there should be no controversy about them, when we actually get to those broader and more heated topics as far as like what is the tension between Indigenous peoples and neoliberalism, and like how has that actually taken the Democratic Party and leadership and stifled a lot of our activism and a lot of our advocacy. You know, we want to get into more substantive issues, but we need to cross these 5 basic things that Massachusetts can do to just be a little less racist. So, you know, these are things that we're pushing for in state. I'm going to go ahead. I have about a minute left, but I just wanted to kind of like also just share, you know, talking a lot about President Biden, but also like talking about our Governor Maura Healey, who was part of the opposition to tribes actually entering into court to provide for protections for graves that are out on Long Island and Boston Harbor Islands. Talking about here in Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu, who blew us off, North American Indian Center of Boston and United American Indians in New England. For 6 months, we wanted to meet with her just on like Indigenous Peoples Day. And she met with us the Thursday before actual IPD, and only to inform us that she was going to declare it Italian American Heritage Day at the same time as Indigenous Peoples Day, which is non-negotiable for us. And then pass the buck on to saying, well, because the president declares Columbus Day alongside Indigenous Peoples Day, my hands are tied. Well, we need better leadership than that. We need more progressive leadership than that. And that's why, I'm here helping to build progressive power so that we can actually have better allies and also get to the point where we actually have Indigenous peoples within the State House, because we have zero Indigenous representation on Beacon Hill, whether it's staff or legislators. So we need to cross those barriers as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, turn it back to Martha. Thank you all for the time. And I look forward to all of your questions and your comments during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc. I just so appreciate both your ability to raise up information that many of us do not have, and your ability to put together the larger ideas that form the fabric that makes it so difficult to really empower people who are left out of our current system. And I look forward to everyone's questions for Jean-Luc, and we'll move on now to Mallory Hanora. Mallory, I see that you're here. I'm so glad that you are able to participate in this. Mallory is Executive Director of Families for Justice as Healing. This is a Roxbury-based prison abolitionist organization led by incarcerated women, formerly incarcerated women, and women with incarcerated loved ones, which works to move Massachusetts towards community-based solutions rather than constructing a new prison system. Mallory, welcome, and take it away.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much, Jean-Luc, as well as devastated to hear about Mayor Wu's announcement of ridiculous Italian American Heritage Month on Indigenous Peoples Day. So look forward to organizing steps about that. And thank you for uplifting that. And thank you, Mass Peace Action and other progressive organizations for having us today. I wanted to say that Families for Justice as Healing and the National Council is incredibly grateful for the support that this network has shown us in our organizing, particularly in the last couple of years, really showing up and standing out with us to fight for the jail and prison construction moratorium, which I'll talk about, but I just wanted to thank you for your solidarity. So my name is Mallory, and the mission of Families for Justice as Healing and our sister organization, the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, is to end the incarceration of women and girls, period. And we are an abolitionist organization, as Martha said. And so for us, that means we recognize that incarceration is always harmful. We know that incarceration separates families. We know that incarceration economically devastates communities for generations. We also know that the current criminal punishment system is an extension of the system of slavery in this country, and absolutely a cornerstone of upholding white supremacy, as well as the hierarchical social order, right? That it imposes and maintains classism and racism and sexism. We also know, as abolitionists, not just about the system that we have to dismantle and take apart, also the system also the work that we do that's generative and creative and life-sustaining. As abolitionist organizers led by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women, we know that something different and better is possible. And we call that approach to the work reimagining communities. Reimagining communities, that framework for organizing, really came out of years of participatory research led by the National Council, formerly incarcerated women talking with incarcerated women, formerly incarcerated women, and women with incarcerated loved ones, not just about the trauma and harm caused by incarceration, but also the vision for what thriving communities really looks like, and asking women, like, what do you want for your own life? What did you need that you didn't get? And what are your dreams for yourself and your children? And from that visioning came this approach, reimagining communities, which is about building community infrastructure and community-led solutions to stop the flow of our people into jail and prison in the first place, from ever getting on a jail or prison bunk. The other thing that reimagining communities does is it positions us in opposition to this idea that we could ever reimagine prisons, that we could ever reimagine policing. So we identify those systems as harmful and as incapable of doing anything but creating more harm. So we know that safety and well-being is never going to come from police, is never going to come from prosecutors, and is never going to come from prisons. So unfortunately, both Democrats and Republicans are committed to expanding the criminal legal system, and we've seen that for generations, and we see it federally and we see it locally. So, with just a quick and dirty history, like of the very recent history, we can look back to Nixon establishing and launching the International War on Drugs. And so, in honor of the conference framework around militarism and its connection to what we're experiencing here in the United States, that the war on people of color, the war on drugs, it is also about the US's imperial control around the world, right? And that continues to this day. So that looks like a vast expansion of law enforcement, as well as massive investment and expansion of the criminal punishment system. And the dismantling of our social system as well, right? So from Nixon to Reagan, destroying social services while wildly increasing defense spending. And then in 1994, of course, the largest expansion of the criminal punishment system in history under Democrat Bill Clinton. And during that era, 1990 to 2005, the United States built a prison every 10 days. So in seeing the increased spending on law enforcement, the increase in harshness and severity and length of punishment and focus only on punishment as a response to social problems, we also see the wild expansion in jail and prison construction. So as sort of an overview of the history that brings us to this moment, during that time also in our recent history, we see that women are the fastest growing incarcerated population in the United States. And so there is a real need to have a gender justice framework and recognize that policing and prisons actually produces gender violence rather than protecting women from it. So what's happening in Massachusetts? What are we doing here in Massachusetts as Families for Justice is Healing and the National Council? Unfortunately, here in Massachusetts, even some of our progressive Democrats seem to believe that the best thing that we can do for women here in the Commonwealth is build them a new women's prison. And when the title of the panel is about communities that are ignored or written over or just not represented by our electeds, that really is an affront to all of the leadership of formerly incarcerated and incarcerated women, and in particular, Black women, who have said over and over and over and over again, there is no such thing as a safe prison for women. So our state has a plan to build a $50 million prison for women. Right now, it looks like the way they're going to operationalize that plan is to completely rebuild Southern Middlesex Correctional Center. So whether you want to build a brand new prison in a field or you want to massively rebuild a prison, the function is the same. And that function is to be able to incarcerate our daughters and our granddaughters and our great-granddaughters, particularly daughters and great-granddaughters and great-great-granddaughters who are Black and brown. That's the function of doing this prison construction, when what we really need is to stop and give the opportunity for communities to lead the solutions so that there is no reason to have a state prison for women at all, not an old one and not a new one. And again, that work is already happening. We call that work reimagining communities. And what my beautiful and gorgeous coworker always says, Sashi James, our director of reimagining communities, she says that policing cannot create healthy, thriving communities. Prosecution cannot create healthy, thriving communities. And prisons cannot create healthy, thriving communities. The only thing that can create healthy, thriving communities is healthy, thriving people. And so we have asked Massachusetts to think about what else is possible for women and our children and all of our families and people besides more jail and prison construction. And so for us, what that looks like is meeting people's basic needs. The National Council on Families for Justice as Healing has a guaranteed basic income program, which is direct cash relief from formerly incarcerated women to women who are in prison right now. So they're able to just have something to build on when they're finally released from prison, and to formerly incarcerated women. No questions asked, $500 a month, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself and your family, because we know that the root causes of women being incarcerated is because they don't have what they need to take care of their family, to take care of their mental health. And so that's one of our programs. We also have a very small, but we're building a guaranteed housing pilot. We're just paying women's rent for a year, because the number one reason that women, our members in Massachusetts, have told us that they've ended up in jail and prison is because they did not have safe or stable housing. We have a community food pantry that we run 3 days a week. A shipping container farm, a freight farm, has finally landed in Roxbury. We're so excited that the community is going to have the opportunity to learn how to grow food, fresh food and vegetables for their family and for the entire neighborhood. And of course, we do participatory defense, which is a people-led movement that's happening around the country that was founded by Silicon Valley Debug in California. And then the National Council trained women all around the country to hold these hubs, to have a place to fight for people in our community who are being tormented by the system or who are already incarcerated. And we're working to fight for their freedom. And that's really to change the balance of power, right? Not waiting for legislators as we create these community-led solutions from the vision of directly affected women. And while we also take care of each other and defend our people from the criminal legal system, this is already happening. And we've shown that it's possible. And we know that there is a pathway home for every single woman inside MCI Framingham, and that there's things that are building on the ground to take care of our sisters when they come home. And one example of that is over the past 4.5 years, through our participatory defense process, we've been fighting for the freedom of Miss Angie Jefferson, following the lead of her daughter, Shanita Jefferson. And she just came home a few months ago and is free after 31 years of incarceration. She was able to overturn her case. She had, so that she was resentenced from first degree, a life without parole sentence, to a life with parole sentence. And her family and community and loved ones absolutely packed every single hearing. Some of you joined us for those hearings while she was still in court, while she was being resentenced. Her community packed the parole hearing and fought for her to come home. And that's what we plan to do for every woman that's inside Framingham, and really create these pathways home. So the organizing that we're going to be doing is really about decarcerating Framingham, starting with our elders and longest serving women. And then we're going to continue to organize with all of you. So we fought hard in a historic organizing effort to take a bill from filing to the governor's desk in a single session. And I see a lot of OGs of Massachusetts organizing on here right now. And you know that that never happens. Our comrades, our gorgeous comrades in the movement to get driver's license for all, did that effort just on the legislative level for over 15 years, and then beautifully fought to make sure that question 4 passed. It just takes forever. We have a dysfunctional legislature. If that doesn't speak to overlooking the needs of communities of color, I don't know what does, how long that took. But formerly incarcerated women led this effort to a single session, really having thousands of conversations all across the state. So many of you helped us have those conversations with your communities about what else is possible besides more jail and prison construction. And then the legislature failed to override Governor Baker's inevitable veto of the jail and prison construction moratorium. And that was devastating for us. You know, the time and the resources that we spent doing that advocacy was at an expense, right? That's organizing time that couldn't go into the reimagining communities work on the ground, because we have to do this defense against this New Women's Prison Project. Imagine if we had this pause, what could flourish in the space and in the breathing room that communities, particularly organizing efforts led by Black women, Black directly affected women, what could take hold and grow during that time to be real and meaningful alternatives to incarceration and to stop our sisters from being incarcerated in the first place. So that was a pretty devastating blow that the legislature just did not choose to come back and override the governor's veto of the jail and prison construction moratorium. But we're not letting that stop us. And so at the end of my time, I'd like to say we are absolutely filing the jail and prison construction moratorium again in January with stronger language. We're going to include youth detention center in asking for this 5-year pause, because now the state is not only planning to build a prison for mothers and grandmothers, but also a new prison for our children, a $21.5 million youth jail in Taunton. So there's a real need for us to stay together and organize to pass the jail and prison construction moratorium as our #1 legislative priority in 2023. Thank you so much.
Sorry, it took me a moment. Mallory, thank you so much. You know, an incredibly informative talk, really important framework. I don't know how familiar others are with the abolitionist framework for understanding, you know, basically how we need to govern ourselves as a society. And so I'm wondering, Mallory, if you have any resources that you would recommend on reading about abolitionism, if you could put them in the chat. I think that, you know, there's a lot of people who would be interested. So let me now introduce Jordan Berg Powers. Jordan is our third and last speaker, but certainly not least. He is Executive Director of Mass Alliance. In his over a decade there, he has helped elect new progressive leaders across the state, recruited progressive champions to run, and trained hundreds of grassroots organizers. Jordan is active in campaigns for saving public education, environmental justice, and a more progressive tax system for the Commonwealth. And he recently served as part of a group called Drawing Democracy, which advised the state legislature on redistricting. You can hear his informative and sage comments on the Massachusetts politics on the podcast Incorruptible Massachusetts, which is also the name of an organization, Incorruptible Massachusetts, which he advised as it made Massachusetts state history by supporting a slate of progressive state house candidates in the last election. Jordan.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor to come after Mallory, who I've known for a very long time, and Jean-Luc, who inspires and informs every time I've had the pleasure of listening. And, you know, I'm glad kicked off the conversation because I think really frames a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of thinking about underserved and often hidden from our political system. How do we get people involved and think about increasing sort of voices and ensuring that we're, who are we centering in these movements? So the first thing I'll say is welcome. Thank you all for being here. When we think about politics, we tend to think of it as the goal or the place that we are, you know, that a lot of our attention and energy on the left goes in. And I think that's a mistake. You know, my job is not to, you know, I don't believe that elections are revolutionary. I don't believe that elections are where change happens. I believe that elections are where the work we do of organizing is either confirmed or destroyed, right? Like we can go backwards and we can sort of solidify the gains that we've made in society. But the work of elections is not the work of progressive change. Progressive change happens when we advocate on issues, when we talk to people, when we have relationships with people, when we bring people into the political and into the electoral, into the system that aren't currently involved. That's the work of progressive and political change. I'm at the end of that. You know, the work that we do in elections, that's the end. That's not the beginning, and that's not the whole. That's the least of the work. It is the easiest to get involved with because it has a clear beginning and a clear end with clear goals and a clear time frame. It's alluring in that way. It has the ability to sort of get, it sort of centers people that way. But it is not the thing that we should be spending all, it shouldn't take the oxygen in the room the way the other work that we need to do as a movement should and could be doing. And so when I moving every place around, when I think about the work that we need to do to sort of bring folks, and I think about the, like where I came from and the folks, the people I grew up with, the kids I grew up with who, I have a ton of privilege. I have been incredibly lucky. Only by chance I am where I am today. It is nothing more. And I think about that a lot. And so that is not the way we should function as a society. We our politics are just broken in this way. And so we really need to think about how are we bringing the folks that I grew up with, the communities that I came from as a kid, how are we bringing those folks into the political system? How are we seeing them? How are we centering them? How are we doing more than simply, asking folks to show up for an election? But how are we centering and encourage and ensuring that power is at the center of communities that are often forgotten, left behind? And the answer is that we know how to do it, and it's actually not complicated, but it's really hard, and it's time consuming. So there's no, one of the things that's weird is that you spend a lot of time, and people, and especially people with money, are always chasing the thing, the fad, the new thing, the thing to be excited about, the thing to look for. But the truth is, the way that we get folks, people are making rational decisions to not engage in a system that has clearly told them that they're not a part of it, they're not welcome, and they shouldn't consider themselves as equal citizens in the country. And they take those cues, they understand them, and they're making rational decisions to not engage in that system because, voting for most people in America is hope over experience. It's hope that things will change despite decades of experience that it won't. And so we need to change that dynamic because we need people to engage both in voting, but also in the political process in any way that they can do so, feel comfortable, be a part of, lead our movements. The only way that we can do that is if we do that through relationships. So how do we do the work of bringing in people who are disengaged, who rightly see that our politics isn't they're not welcome in it. That's through relationships, through deep relationships built by organizers who are well paid, hopefully unionized, who can show up beyond elections. They aren't there to say vote for this person. Come, it's a panic. We need you now. They're there to build relationships, to build power, to understand to understand their community's concerns, to understand what's going on with their neighbors, their kids, all the things that are happening, and to translate that into political action and hopefully political power. That takes work, that takes time, that takes money, and it's not sexy. It's just really good old-fashioned organizing. It takes I saw a study that said it takes on average 8 to 12 years to turn a non-voter into a sometimes voter, an unreliable voter, and a lot of money and a lot of resources. So that's really the work. The work is to be where people are, to talk to people, to care about them, to listen, and to translate the things that are happening in their lives into political opportunity and political power. The last thing I'll say really quickly is that we are in Massachusetts. Generally on the left, we are always looking for a quick fix, and because the problem is so acute, it's so there's a lot of harm that is happening, and we want it to fix it. We want it to get better, and there's things that the solutions are out there. We know that we just need legislators to do the things. We know that works. We're asking them to make logical decisions, and they're not. And so we're often looking for quick fixes. And so we spend all of our energy in the state house or on elections, talking to a few people, trying to be nice to these people. And we're not doing any of the hard long-term work it takes to actually change the dynamics. If you want things to pass, you need power. And to have power, you need to bring people from our communities. You need to make politics relevant to their lives. And then you need to have those people talk to the people in power and tell them either care or else. Care or else. Like that's the work. The work is empowering is bringing our folks in communities to people of power so that they have to listen to us rather than asking people of power to do the right thing, maybe because it's the nice thing to do. It's like totally opposite of how organizing should work, but that's Massachusetts. Massachusetts is obsessed with the state house without ever demanding power from outside it, without ever bringing regular people. And the most successful folks, when I think about, for example, why Mallory and why the folks in that movement were able to do something that so often doesn't happen, which is to take something and from a beginning in the same session to passing, it's because they consistently brought people who were affected, the voices who should be leading on these movements, the people who are affected by these policies, to people in power, and asked us to join them in advocating on behalf of those communities, of our communities. I mean, my community, I live here in Worcester, and certainly I live in that type of a place. So when I think about that work, that's the model. It's let people who are affected by the issues lead the power, lead the movements, lead the policy changes, bring the rest of the people along to say, do what they want us to do, and demand it of our legislators so that they do the right thing. That is the model. That's how we bring disaffected folks in. That's how we make progressive change. That's how we bridge these gaps. Sorry, I had something else to say, but I'm distracted by moving around all the time. Last thing
is somebody controlling that, or
I don't know what's happening.
Somebody's spotlighting the wrong faces. Sorry about the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, I forgot the last thing I was going to say about it, but that's what I'd say is just we really have to get back to basic organizing, basic things. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say is we need to be where people are. So we've done a lot of focus groups at Mass Alliance. We've talked to a lot of poor, I don't want to say poor, that's not the right term, of working class white folks. So folks who often actually aren't poor, they actually have oftentimes money and have good paying jobs, but who are not college educated. And we wanted to get a sense of the historically voted Democrat no longer do. What are the things that are animating them? What are the things that they care about? And where are they getting their information? And the things I can say is that what's animating a lot of those folks is racism, just flat out racism. I think we should be clear about that. But it's in the absence of communicating anything else. So if you feel like things are getting worse, and one political party and one movement, the conservative movement, is saying clearly to you that the reason things are getting bad is because Black and brown people and other people, ill-defined, like really ill-defined, other people are getting things that you're not getting. And the response to that is like, they never talk to you, let alone vague images that that speak down to you and aren't on your values and don't really signal in any way to you the things you care about. Then they will hear the racist thing and they'll be like, well, I want that because I want racial hierarchy, because there's no one else talking to me and there's nothing else. And so what we saw from what we saw in talking to people is that sort of thing. And so what I would say is, and the other thing we learned is that people are getting information from Twitter, from TikTok, from Instagram, from their local news station, like Channel 5, Channel 7. That was like shocking to me, honestly. And they are, so they're on social media and they're Googling things like healthcare for all, for and against. And where are we? Where do we obsess about being? In the newspaper? Imagine caring about being in the Boston Globe. Who the hell reads the Boston Globe? Nobody who hasn't decided what they think about things. Like the 10 people who still read their terrible reporting, but we obsess about being in old papers. And like, when was the last time you pitched a story to Channel 5 or Channel 7? when was the last time you when was the last time you got on TikTok and talked about the issues you care about? When was the last time you, your organization ran an ad on Instagram or Facebook? I mean, I hate Meta, but like, that's where people are. Are we in the places where the conversations are happening? Largely not. When was, I get frustrated when people like dismiss culture as like, oh, like we don't need culture, we should teach people history. People don't understand. I'm bored by history. Give me culture. Give me art. Give me the ways that people get, a well-written art, a well-written movie or television program is going to do more than a history lesson will ever do. It just, art is always going to be the core of our work. It will never be a lecture. But leftists, we like lectures, man. We like podcasts. And so we need to be in the spaces and we need to be cultivating the things that change people's minds, that hit people where they are. And I'm not just talking about people who disagree with us because we obsess about those folks. I'm talking about people we imagine agree with us, but we never have conversations. And those are most of the people I grew up with. That's certainly everyone in my neighborhood, right? I live in a poor part of Worcester that definitely politicians have rarely door knocked in this neighborhood, right? There's not enough votes. And certainly there's a lot of languages, right? And there's a lot of poverty. So, we just need to be where people are, and we need to care about what they care about, and we need to be invested in their lives, and we need to bring them to power. That is how you change the dynamic. It's not sexy. It's not actually innovative. It's been well documented. There are a million books behind me that all say the same thing about it. We just need to do those things, and we will be more successful.
Thank you, Jordan. So you can hear me, right? Very
Yes, we hear you.
stimulating. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. So thank you, Jordan. That was, thought-provoking and stimulating. And now we get to the part where all of us as the audience gets to ask questions of any of the three panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to Russell, who's going to be managing that.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? I hope so.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
we can only see your beard, not your eyes.
Oh, sorry. I leaned forward. You can't see me. There's just one question in the chat. So if anyone has other questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to take advantage to ask the first one, then I'll ask a second. My question is, do you find that the Democratic Party is an ally in what you're trying to do or a hindrance? And it's to any one of all three of you. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I think you can articulate it in a good way. And then I've got a second question to ask with that. So want to take in reverse order, Jordan and Mallory? Then Luke?
I don't think of political parties as for or against us. They're made up of people, people who are trying to get to 51% in our very broken electoral system. So do I think that the Democratic Party is an entity that has a coherent idea of what the fuck it's doing and a plan? No. Do I think it's largely trying to cobble together a left of center and very right-wing coalition in America where politics has moved so far right? Yeah, it's trying to get to 51%. I guess it largely, Mass Alliance, my job is to basically unseat Democrats all day. So I don't have a terribly good relationship with them, but I also don't really think about it that way. I think mostly about people in power and the power structures at play, and we don't have them. And whether or not the progressives used to be Republican and now leaning Democratic don't mean anything to me. What means something to me is the ideology.
Mallory, you got to.
Yeah. It's incredibly frustrating to live in a state that has this, ideology about being progressive and like a super majority of Democrats, and then to see the level of organized abandonment that continues to happen even in the, an incredibly resourced state. So yeah, it makes me feel dejected a lot. I think And I think Jordan's right. Like it's about people, these individuals, but also that you don't get to just say that your party or that your political affiliation, like I'm progressive, whatever, it means anything without action. So it is about holding people accountable. It's also about how we govern. Like we really believe in building up people-led and participatory processes. We're so proud to have one participatory budgeting in Boston, for example. So really demanding that the people get to distribute the resources ourselves, centering those communities that have been actively disinvested in favor of paying for things like policing in prison. So, even for those legislators, like what does it look like if there's going to be money that's reinvested or reallocated, that we create people-led processes to do that distribution and not a legislator-led process, and like really rolling up your sleeves and like getting down with your constituents and hearing what they want. And then I think that does connect to the other question that I saw, which is like, if I'm living in a community that's sort of less directly affected by the criminal punishment system, for example, or other systems of oppression, or like people have what they need here, what can I do? And I think that's where that solidarity is incredibly important, is that when you tell you're from a well-resourced community and you stand in solidarity with communities that have been disinvested in, and you said, we're together on this, right? This is what's better for all of us. It is not good for wealthy white people to have a new women's prison. That is not serving the function of well-being for our neighbors or our families. And we're united in that front. And we recognize that more harm is caused, which makes, it's just better for all of us to live in a state that doesn't have a new women's prison or any women's prison. And that is really powerful, because we're also an incredibly segregated state, both by class and race. So that helps to like break down, this idea that this is just a Boston issue, for example, or just a Springfield issue, and helps us, move things that are important to oppressed communities across the state.
Thanks, Mallory. Jean-Luc?
Yeah, a couple of things. So obviously, I started off today when we talked, reflecting on land acknowledgements, talking about the basic civics question of understanding who are the original peoples, who are the continuing governments within your local sphere, and what are those obligations to those original peoples. And so, that's a very, very much like, outside of the system, outside of Democrats, outside of Republicans, outside of the Green Party, and all of this stuff. But the thing that's really frustrating here within Massachusetts is that there's a lot of foregone conclusions that, oh, well, of course, Maura Healey's going to be the next governor. Of course, my counselor will vote this way because they want to be the next DA, or like, of course, like the DA wants to be the next senator, so they're going to push for these policies. And so it's like, there's so much of the machine and so much about like the career politicians that aren't necessarily there for the people that they should be representing. And actually like really changing the system. So those are the things that we're up against. And one thing that Jordan brought up in terms of like elections and started having like those clear beginnings and endings, for a lot of us on the front lines, there is no clear beginning or ending. It's just life. People that are on the front lines, our bodies are on the line, and this is why we should have our leadership uplifted. This is why people should support and follow, because we put ourselves out there in spite of all of the folks that are just kind of cranking the wheel and taking care of their careers and going up the ladder and all of this stuff. And we have this aristocracy basically. So yeah, there's lots of things that are happening. And I don't think it is just the one party, but I absolutely think that careers and the mechanics of the system are a lot of what gets in the way of our people.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. There's a question from Rosemary to Mallory. Do you have a sense of how Governor Healey will react to the new prison moratorium bill?
Okay,
so mind reader, Mallory, because I'm not sure anybody has any idea how Maura Healey's going to do about anything, but please.
Right. Well, I have to be careful because I work for a 501c3 organization. So what I can say about, now I guess she's elected. So I have a lot of concerns. And I think we all have reason to have concern. Given some of first of all, there was just coming from the former top law enforcement official of the Commonwealth to have nobody focused on criminal legal issues on the transition team is astounding, absolutely astounding to me. But more than that, again, just what my incredible co-panelists have been saying, like we can't expect anything out of electeds if we are not willing to demand it and then showing up over and over and over and over and over again until it's done. So Jean-Luc just said it perfectly also. Please do not think she's going to do anything. And so we have to show up and ask for it over and over and over again. And we are trying to do that. We are trying to ask our coalition partners. I just said it in front of a room full of lawyers and social workers and psychologists yesterday. If you have a doorway into her office, open up that doorway for directly affected people. Open up that doorway for formerly incarcerated women to sit with her. Open up that doorway for Indigenous leaders to sit with her and have that meeting ourselves and ask for what we want. We sent her office a memo when she was still running and it got zero response whatsoever. We stand by every single thing, all 5 of the demands in the memo. I'll share it with you in the chat. We've been very clear about what we want and expect from the governor's office and just want an opportunity to ask her ourselves, to have formerly incarcerated women ask her herself, will you commit to doing this? So we will absolutely be organizing around that. And I know that can only happen if you all are with us and we make that demand together.
Thank you. Martha asks, what kind of people can get creative, progressive messaging out in the media that normal people pay attention to? Any suggestions from anyone or all 3 of you?
I mean, how much time do you have? I have endless thoughts
about
our progressive media. I guess I would say the biggest thing we do poorly is we end with the solution and we don't walk people through the sort of emotional journey it took for us to get there. Because a lot of the times we got there just internally. We sort of thought about what would be the best thing for society, and that's the position we took. But most people aren't there. They don't pay attention that much. They have lives. They care about, other things. And so they just don't, they're not into the weeds of a lot of the things that we sit around and think about all the time. And so I'll just give you an easy example. One of the things I hate is when we talk about healthcare for Medicare for all, and people don't really know what that means. And it's sort of really amorphous. And we've sort of walked people through to the end, which is everybody should have access to this thing. And we don't really talk to people about the problems. And so whenever I'm talking about healthcare, I always say our system's stupid. No one else in the world does it because it doesn't make any sense. When you get sick, you should just go to the doctor. That's it. That's how I talk about healthcare for all. You should get to go to the doctor, and everything else is noise. When we're in the media, we just get into the solution, we get into the weeds, and we don't talk about the emotional. We don't talk about we don't really get into where people's spaces are, which is, emotions, sounds, smells. That's how people interact with policy. So, I think rather than getting directly to the solutions, I wish we spent more time on the journey, on the journeys, on the emotions, on where people are emotionally, and focus on those things. And that's, yeah.
Yeah, and just really quickly, I think that this is also part of the reason why there's the importance of the push for Indigenous Peoples Day, the importance of the commemoration of National Day of Mourning, and even when we're talking about our Palestinian solidarity anniversaries with Al-Nakba and things like this, how do we actually redefine the calendar so that we can actually start to kind of create those beats where oh, okay, now this is this part of the year, and now we're going to actually start talking about this again. And so when we actually kind of shift those narratives within those commemorations, within how we shape history from year to year, I think that the media then comes and actually looks for those voices to say okay, we're talking about this again. They just love repetition, so I think that that's one of the things as well.
I want to talk about that too, just real quick, as like a not an end goal of success, but sort of how much we can go by focusing and really making it simple for folks. So I don't know about you, but how many of you heard like a really effed up story about like Thanksgiving and Columbus Day and all the things as a kid, and like had to know the names of Kuros Climbers? I did. I had that stuff. I got all that. You know who didn't get that? My daughter. She's in school right now. She didn't get any of that stuff. She's getting a much more complex, not where I'd like it to be by any stretch of the imagination. But when I think about a lifetime, right, like just my life to my daughter's life, change in how teachers who aren't versed in these policies, they are regular folks who are just trying to figure out how to get a bunch of really small kids to like listen for 5 minutes, right? How are they approaching these things? And it's not the same. It's not the same sort of terrible thing. So, I always like to lift up success as a thing, like and the importance of the focus on the calendar, because that is how we learn history. That's how the schools learn it. That's how we teach it to our kids. So not to say that we're there, but rather to say like, look what we can do.
Thanks, Jordan. Christine asks, what your opinion of ranked choice voting, would that help?
Can I interrupt for just 1 second for a time check? Maybe we'll make that the last question and then we'll go into our breakouts. Sorry, Russell.
That's all right. Thank you, Martha.
I'll just say really quickly, I was one of the 10 signers to ranked choice voting. I believe it's a more small d democratic way to do elections, but we should be clear that it will have bad outcomes for leftists. Like it's just not gonna, the reason that people push it is because it'll help not like, it's harder for progressive candidates to win ranked choice voting currently. We have to win on the ideas, because we have to not just win the sort of leftists who are with us, we now have to win over moderates as a second place vote or a first place vote. That's a lot more work. And so we should be clear-eyed about the policy. I believe in it because it's more democratic and it's a better reflection of people's will. And as I believe in that, I believe strongly in people's ability to have a say over their own lives, but it also will make the politics tougher.
Thank you. Thank all three of you. Martha?
Yes, thank you, Russell. Thanks to the panel. So we're going to go into breakouts. I'm not really clear about the mechanics of this. We've got some really exciting breakouts that,